Hello, it's time to find out what happens in Chapter 9 of Charlotte's Web, and Chapter 9 is called Wilbur's Boast. A spider's web is stronger than it looks. Although it is made of thin, delicate strands, the web is not easily broken. However, a web gets torn every day by the insects that kick around in it, and a spider must rebuild it when it is full of holes. Charlotte liked to do her weaving during the late afternoon, and Fern liked to sit nearby and watch her. One afternoon, Fern overheard a most interesting conversation, and she witnessed a strange event. "You have awfully hairy legs, Charlotte," said Wilbur, as the spider worked busily at her task. "My legs are hairy for a good reason," replied Charlotte. "Furthermore, each leg of mine has 7 sections. I never knew that. The sections are the coxa, the trochanter, the femur, the patella, the tibia. Now they sound familiar bones, don't they, Year 3, from our work earlier this year? The metatarsus and the tarsus." And at this Wilbur sat bolt upright. "You're kidding," he said. "No, I'm not. Say those names again. I didn't catch them the first time." "Coxa, trochanter, femur, patella, tibia, metatarsus and tarsus." "Goodness," said Wilbur, looking down at his own chubby legs. "I don't think my legs have got 7 sections." "Well," said Charlotte, "you and I lead very different lives. You don't have to spin a web, and that takes a great deal of legwork." "I could spin a web if I tried," said Wilbur. "I've just never tried." "Let's see you do it then," said Charlotte. Fern chuckled softly at this, and her eyes grew wide with love for the pig. "Okay," replied Wilbur. "You coach me and I'll spin one. It might be a lot of fun to spin a web. So, how do I start?" "Take a deep breath," said Charlotte, smiling, and Wilbur breathed deeply. "Now climb to the highest part you can get to, like this," and Charlotte raced to the top of a doorway. Wilbur clambered on top of the manure pile. "Very good," said Charlotte. "Now make an attachment with your spinnerets, hurl yourself into space, and let out a dragline as you go down." Wilbur hesitated for a moment, then jumped out into the air. He glanced hastily behind to see if a piece of rope was following him to check his fall, but nothing seemed to be happening in his rear, and the next thing he knew, he landed with a thump. "Oof," he grunted. Charlotte laughed so hard that her web began to sway. "What did I do wrong?" asked the pig, when he recovered from his bump. "Nothing," said Charlotte. "I think it was a nice try." "I think I'll try again," said Wilbur cheerfully. "I believe what I need is a little piece of string to hold me." The pig walked out to the yard. "Are you there, Templeton?" he called, and the rat poked his head from underneath the trough. "Have you got a little bit of string I could borrow?" asked Wilbur. "I need it to spin a web." "Yes, indeed," replied Templeton, who had saved some string. "No trouble at all. Anything to oblige." And he crept down into his hole, pushed the goose egg out of the way. "Oh, I'd forgotten about that goose egg. Do you remember? That was the smelly one, the not very nice one." He pushed that out the way, and he returned with an old piece of dirty white string. Wilbur examined it. "That's just the thing," he said. "Tie one end to my tail, will you, Templeton?" Wilbur crouched low, with his thin, curly tail pointing towards the rat. Templeton seized the string, he passed it around the pig's tail, and tied it in 2 half hitches. They're a kind of knot you can do. Charlotte watched all of this in delight. Like Fern, she was truly fond of Wilbur, whose smelly pen and stale food attracted the flies that she needed. She was proud to see that he was not a quitter, and he was willing to try again to spin a web. While the rat and the spider and the little girl watched, Wilbur climbed again to the top of the manure pile, full of energy and hope. "Everybody watch me," he cried, and summoning all his strength, he threw himself into the air head first. The string trailed behind him, but he had neglected to fasten the other end to anything at all, and so it didn't really do any good, and that's why Wilbur landed with a crash and hurt. Tears came to his eyes. Templeton grinned at him. Charlotte just sat quietly. After a bit, she spoke. "You can't spin a web, Wilbur, and I advise you to take the idea out of your mind. You lack 2 things needed for spinning a web." "What are they?" asked Wilbur sadly. "You lack a set of spinnerets, and you lack know-how. But you must cheer up. You do not need a web." "I'm just wondering about that word spinnerets. It's not one I've come across before, but I think I can understand what that word means. When you consider the fact that Charlotte said you needed them to spin a web. What do you think they are and what they look like? Where do you think they might be? Of course, if you've got time, you could take a look maybe at the internet to find out more. But I'm guessing that they're part of the spider's body, somewhere near their bottom, somewhere where the web actually comes out of. I think that must be what spinnerets are. Let's carry on with the story anyway. Charlotte's talking, remember? She says to Wilbur, "Cheer up, you don't need a web. Zuckerman supplies you with 3 good meals a day. Why would you worry about trapping your food?" And look, there's a picture here just to describe that part where Templeton is tying that string to Wilbur's tail. Such a shame Wilbur didn't tie the other end to something useful. Wilbur sighed. "You're ever so much cleverer and brighter than I am, Charlotte. I guess I was just trying to show off, and it serves me right." Templeton untied his string and took it back with him. Charlotte returned to her weaving. "You needn't feel too badly, Wilbur," she said. "Not many creatures can spin webs. Even men are not as good at it as spiders, although they think they're pretty good, and they'll try anything. Did you ever hear of the Queensborough Bridge?" Wilbur shook his head. "Is that a kind of web?" "Sort of," replied Charlotte. "But do you know how long it took men to build it? 8 whole years. My goodness, I would have starved to death waiting that long. I can make a web in a single evening." And what we've got here is another picture, just showing you how daft Wilbur looked when he was leaping himself off the manure pile. "What do people catch in the Queensborough Bridge? Is it bugs?" asked Wilbur. "No," said Charlotte. "They don't catch anything. They just keep trotting back and forth across the bridge, thinking there's something better on the other side. If they'd hang head down at the top of the thing and wait quietly, maybe something good would come along. But no, with men it's rush, rush, rush every minute. I'm glad I'm a sedentary spider." "What does sedentary mean?" asked Wilbur. "Do you know what that word means?" "Well, sedentary means I sit still a good part of the time, and I don't go wandering all over creation. I know a good thing when I see it, and my web is a good thing. You see, I stay put and wait for things to come to me. It gives me a chance to think." "Well, I'm sort of sedentary myself, I guess," said the pig. "I have to hang around here whether I want to or not. You know where I'd really like to be this evening?" "Where?" "In a forest, looking for beech nuts and truffles and delectable roots. I'd like to be pushing leaves aside with my strong nose, searching and sniffing and smelling along the ground. "You smell just the way you are," remarked a lamb who had just walked in. "I can smell you from here. You're the smelliest creature in the place." Wilbur hung his head, and his eyes became wet with tears. Charlotte noticed his embarrassment, and she spoke sharply to the lamb. "Let Wilbur alone," she said. "He has a perfect right to smell, considering his surroundings. You're no bundle of sweet peas yourself. Furthermore, you've just interrupted a very pleasant conversation." "What were we talking about, Wilbur, before we were so rudely interrupted?" "Oh, I don't remember," said Wilbur, "and it doesn't really matter. Let's not talk any more for a while. I'm getting sleepy. You go ahead and finish fixing your web, and I'll just lie here and watch you. It's a lovely evening." And with that, Wilbur stretched out on his side and sighed a long sigh. Twilight settled over Zuckerman's barn, and with it a feeling of peace. Fern knew it was almost supper time, but she couldn't bear to leave. Swallows flew by on silent wings, in and out of the doorways, bringing food for their young. From across the road a bird sang. Lurvy was sitting under an apple tree and lit his pipe. The animals sniffed the familiar, strong smell of tobacco. Wilbur heard the trill of a tree toad and the occasional slamming of a kitchen door. All these sounds were making him comfortable and happy. He loved life, and he loved to be part of the world on a summer evening. But as he lay there, he remembered what the old sheep had told him. Thoughts of death came to him, and he began to tremble with fear. "Charlotte," he said softly. "Yes," she replied. "I don't want to die." "Of course you don't," said Charlotte in a comforting voice. "I just love it here in the barn," said Wilbur. "I love everything about this place." "Of course you do," said Charlotte. "We all do." With that the goose appeared, followed by her 7 goslings. They thrust their little necks out and kept up a musical whistling, like a tiny troop of pipers. Wilbur listened to the sound with love in his heart. "Charlotte?" he asked. "Yes," said the spider. "Were you serious when you promised you would keep them from killing me?" "I was never more serious in my life. I am not going to let you die, Wilbur." "Well, how are you going to save me?" asked Wilbur, curious. "Well," said Charlotte, vaguely, "I don't really know, but I'm working on a plan." "That's wonderful," said Wilbur. How is the plan coming on, Charlotte? Have you got very far with it?" Wilbur was trembling, but Charlotte, she was cool and collected. "Oh, it's coming on all right," she said. "It's still in the early stages, and it hasn't completely shaped up yet. But I'm working on it." "When do you work on it?" begged Wilbur. "When I'm hanging head down at the top of my web. That's when I do all my thinking, because the blood has rushed to my head." "I'll only be too glad to help," said Wilbur. "Oh, I'll work it out alone," said Charlotte. "All right," said Wilbur. "Just let me know." "Well," replied Charlotte, "if you want to help, you must try to build yourself up. I want you to get plenty of sleep. I want you to stop worrying. Never hurry and never worry. Chew your food thoroughly and eat every little bit of it, except you must leave a little bit just for Templeton. Gain weight and stay well. That's the way you can help. Keep fit and don't lose your nerve. Do you think you understand?" "Yes, I understand," said Wilbur. "Well, go along to bed then," said Charlotte. "Remember, sleep is important." Wilbur trotted over to the darkest corner of his pen, and he threw himself down. He closed his eyes, but in a moment he spoke again. "Charlotte?" "Yes, Wilbur." "May I go out to my trough and see if I left any of my supper? I think I left just a tiny bit of mashed potato." "Very well," said Charlotte, but then straight to sleep without delay. Wilbur started to race out to his yard. "Slowly, slowly," said Charlotte. "Never hurry, never worry." Wilbur checked himself and this time crept slowly to his trough. He found the bit of potato, chewed it carefully, swallowed it and walked himself back to bed. He closed his eyes and was silent for a little while longer, before asking, "Charlotte?" "Yes," she replied. "May I get a drink of milk? I think there's a few drops of milk in my trough." "No," said Charlotte, "the trough is dry and I want you to go to sleep. No more talking. Close your eyes. Go to sleep." Wilbur shut his eyes, and with that Fern got up from her stool and started for home. Her mind was full of everything she had seen and heard. "Good night, Charlotte," said Wilbur. "Good night, Wilbur." There was a pause. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night, Wilbur." And that's where the chapter ends. Have a think about the advice that Charlotte gave Wilbur. He was really worried about the future, and she advised him to eat well and to stay healthy and to stay rested. I want you to think about two things. First of all, why do you think Charlotte gave him that advice? What do you think she was really aiming for? And how similar is the advice Charlotte has given Wilbur just now in this chapter to the advice that we must all follow at the moment to keep ourselves safe? It's interesting to think about the similarities there. And with that, I'll leave you for now. Next chapter is called An Explosion. Crikey, let's hope it's nothing too serious. But until then, bye for now.